Coming up, racist or just racy? A tape with a cult following. Well, have you ever heard of Brocket 99? I admit I hadn't. It started as a cassette of a fake radio show set up on an Indian reserve in Alberta. The tape got copied and passed around, and Brocket 99 developed a cult following. Now, it's something of a cultural phenomenon in Western Canada. To some people, Brock 99 is hilarious, but others don't hear the humor. They think Brocket 99 is racist and offensive, and what you're about to hear actually does include some language that might be considered offensive.
This is Brocket 99, rocking the reservation in stereo.
Up and Adam, it's 8:30 on the reservation with Ernie Scar. Good morning, here's some AC/DC to get your day started right. Hope to see you all at the big powwow coming up in Brocket on the 19th. You could stop by, lots of hospitality, gonna be lots of drinking and some Indian art.
All right, that's from Brocket 99. Nilesh Patel is a filmmaker in Vancouver. He's been curious about Brocket 99 ever since he first heard it when he was a teenager. Now he's making a documentary about it. Good morning, Nilesh.
Good morning.
Okay, well, first, this is a heavy one to get right into here. Tell me a bit about the content of Brocket 99, because we only heard a short snippet.
So the actual tape was made in the mid-'80s, and it's a parody of radio and a parody of what it would sound like if Aboriginals had a radio station. And it's based in the actual town site of Brocket on the Piikani Nation in southern Alberta. The content is basically, I look at it as it's a parody of a radio show, a classic almost CBC sort of morning radio show, especially at the end. It's basically a summary of all the stereotypes, all the jokes about alcoholism, abuse of alcohol, sexual abuse, pure idiocy and fallacy of the person, summed up into one tape. And it traveled, never sold, marketed, or distributed, but it was dubbed, and went across Canada, a lot of parts of the United States where you have associations with Aboriginals. So states that, like the Dakotas and Utah and Arizona. And due to the internet now, 20 years later from when it was made, it's had a resurgence of websites and the ability to be heard by people around the world.
So where did you first hear it?
I first heard it in the parking lot of my high school in Prince George, skipping class probably, to take a listen at Brocket 99 and laughed my butt off for, well, the period of time that we skipped out of class.
Do you remember what you thought of it when you first heard it?
I understood why we snuck out of class to go listen to it privately in the car the second I heard it. I just thought it was, you knew it was wrong. It was a dirty magazine. It was something you didn't want to get caught listening to, but it was funny. Like, a lot of the radio parody, like, they do an interview at the end where they basically recut an interview with a country musician star. And the way that it was done, it was just so well cut and so well taken in the way that they took on radio parody, and how that interviews tend to run to a certain beat, and people's, the interviewer's voice comes in at the appropriate moment and the person's statements end at the appropriate moment. So they took that and then added their own DJ doing the interview and what his take on everything the interviewee said was. So a lot of the actual parody, and let's be truthful here, the tape's two sides, 98 minutes total, I think. About 30 minutes of that's AC/DC. And the rest of it's really fart jokes. And I'm a 15-year-old teenage boy, so up north. And I'm getting 30 minutes of AC/DC mixed in with a bunch of fart jokes. It couldn't have been more appropriate for most the other men and people I knew.
Okay, the parts that weren't AC/DC and fart jokes. I mean, I don't know what you think of it now, obviously, but back to when you were a 15-year-old, did you find it offensive? Did you know, you knew it was something that you had to sneak out to hear, but were you actually offended by it?
Parts of it. Yeah, I definitely was offended by parts of it, but as a whole, I didn't really think it was. Well, I knew it was something you shouldn't listen to with a certain crowd, and I didn't ever own a copy, but I didn't really think about it too much. And to be perfectly honest, I don't think at 15 I thought about anything really too much.
Why decide to make a film about this?
Well, I thought about the tape popped into my mind 3 years ago again, and you think about that and assume there's some growth in your life and your way of thinking since when you're 15 and you're almost 30. You start thinking about things that happen. You're the reflective age past your mid-20s, and suddenly, if you're me, you start just thinking about funny stuff and like, wow, that was a funny tape. Then you start thinking about a little more and go, oh, I think that was racist. And so what I did was I started going to the internet and started seeing this tape still floating around, like you could download it off of whatever file share is out there. And a few months later, websites started popping up, and I actually just went to a few parties and started throwing it around there and just saying, hey, has anyone heard Brocket 99? And started getting just this wide group of people from all over different parts of Canada, but probably not Toronto or Montreal or Vancouver, who had heard the Brocket 99 tape, and immediately the look in their eyes was like this sort of look around to see if anyone else was looking at them, and then they'd heard the tape, and I sort of thought it was weird for something that none of us had ever paid for, something that was obviously racist, that we all somehow had gotten a chance to listen to it, and for being so far apart, we found these jokes about, geographically, had found the same jokes about Aboriginals so funny. Yet we had grown up in completely different surroundings.
Did you have any sense at all that it would have this kind of cult following?
I never really thought, the tape's made in southern Alberta. I never even really thought about where it was made until deciding to really do the documentary and really listening to the tape. For me, growing up in Prince George, the tape seemed like it could have been made in Prince George. It was making fun of natives drinking Lysol. I worked downtown at the Zellers in Prince George, and one of my main jobs as a mail there was to protect the Lysol and Scope, to protect the margin of Zellers, based upon sales of Lysol and Scope. So no, they sell more than that. So I never really looked at the tape too far when I was younger, but now that I was older, it seemed like something that we could actually talk about. Like you and I are talking right now, and we're as two non-Aboriginal people talking about something that affects Aboriginals. And the way I looked at it and thought about it was, I think this affects Canadians. I don't think this is an Aboriginal issue. I think I find that the racism in it, they obviously understand it, just as any ethnic group understands the racism directed towards them. What is important about this tape is everyone who is listening to it and how it traveled so far without anyone really purchasing it. And why would someone be saying in southern Alberta or BC going, Uncle Joe in Nova Scotia would really find this funny. Okay, well, why would Uncle Joe find a tape that's so based in Western Canada, so funny when it's making fun of Aboriginals is really the only thing there? And when you start to think about that, it's something that can open up a discussion amongst Canadians about what our relationship is. And I mean this is non-Aboriginals and Aboriginals. This is a tape, a piece of media that immediately attracts an opinion, immediately attracts a discussion about...
And it generalizes,
Gross
stereotypes.
Gross generalization.
It's not just. It doesn't just have implications for Aboriginals. This could be made. This kind of tape could be made about various communities. Playing off stereotypes.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, and I think that's what people always say is that it can be made about various communities, but they always bring up examples of, well, isn't it just like Cheech and Chong or Margaret Cho? I think it's Margaret Cho making fun of their own cultures. Well, there's a difference in most of us who are immigrants or children of immigrants, right? Our parents made a choice to come to this country and made a choice and some sort of realization that, hey, things may not be so good for so long, but I'm sure they'll be great eventually, especially if you chose to go to a small community versus one of our few true metropolitan and multicultural communities. Aboriginals never had a choice in the matter. There wasn't, hey, these people are coming, we should be prepared for the racism that can ensue. No, they were here already. So it's not, it is comparable that the racism goes through all ethnicities and stereotyping does, but in the context of Canada and what this can relate to Canada in the relationships between groups in Canada, the Aboriginal situation, as always, is much different than any other group because they're not an ethnic group.
I want to play. I got to ask you, listening to that, and approaching making a documentary, did you worry about giving attention to this kind of stuff? I mean, here we are on national radio playing it and talking about it.
Did I worry? Yes. I think I can't deny that more people would hear Brocket. Well, I hope more people hear Brocket 99 through the film. But the fact is, more people will be exposed to it. And I think there's something happened in my last film where I did film on East Indian stereotypes, or Can Indian as I call myself. People are saying, well, some people are just going to be, we had a lot of Indians playing stereotype. And you're like, well, aren't you worried you're perpetuating the stereotype? Like, well, the stereotype exists. I'm not creating anything new. What I'm doing is putting it in a different situation and a different way of looking at it. I don't feel in this film, or my last film, I will create a racist attitude. I don't think that you go and listen to that tape and become a racist. That's why the tape's not very powerful to me. It's just a piece of medium. The power lies in the fact that there was an audience for it, an audience that understood the tape, understood the jokes, and laughed at any piece of media is benign unless there's an audience. And what about the Canadian audience made them receptive to a tape that is very obviously prejudicial? I'm not denying any of the humor and the skill of parody at all, but to deny the racial nature or prejudicial nature of that is also to have a bias to one side. And I think that we should be open to the fact that this is something that we converse about because the tape is benign. It's us who allow these attitudes to grow, and it's us who have the attitudes that allow humor like this to be around. And what, the question we want to talk about this tape is, we talk about why is it funny, why do you like it, but eventually it just turns into, depending on your view, whether it's racist or if it's just humor, you start to defend a position about what's humor or what's racism. And that's what's important, is that it touches into some sort of weird Canadian psyche sort of thing where it is very obvious that in all of us, even though it seems that most of us aren't ever given the chance to speak about people and dealing with other people in our communities versus politicians, academics, and other leaders, that this tape will allow us to be able to have a conversation that has to do with what do I think about you and what did I grow up in.
Let me ask you about those conversations. On your travels, what did you hear from people about Brocket 99? You traveled through Alberta. What are their impressions and memories of it?
Well, we did travel through Alberta, BC, and Saskatchewan, but obviously emphasis on Alberta. The impressions of the tape are, just what I said, there's the person who immediately sees, I wore a t-shirt around with Brocket 99 on it, just so people may know that. And
there's a brilliant device. You're walking around, just to let me describe it in the film, you're walking around with a Brocket 99 t-shirt on. You don't necessarily, you're just seeing how people are going to react.
Yeah.
And people are pointing at it and remembering it and saying, I love that show, or I love that tape.
Well, a lot of the premise for the film was based upon me. And if I ever saw a Brocket 99 movie or t-shirt or anything, what would I do? I'd react to it because I've never forgotten that tape. And you would never forget that tape if you've ever heard it once. It sticks out for one way, for humor or for racism. So people would react, if they reacted just to the shirt, they probably are reacting to like, I can't believe you're wearing that shirt. I can't believe you're out in public at the Calgary Stampede with, over 10 days, 1 million people coming by of all types. And then there'd be excitement. There'd be excitement of loving the tape and thinking it was the greatest thing ever. Then you'd have people who are sort of like, it's funny, but I'm not sure if you should really be talking about it, it's kind of prejudicial, but it is funny. So you get your mid-ground people who understand. And basically your middle ground is people who live and exist in actual communities that have interaction with Aboriginals and are laughing at something they know, as in the stereotype and the abuse, as in a way of dealing with just like most humor, but also know that it's just a stereotype and it represents so little of the Aboriginal population. And then there's there's those who think that tape is just dead on. It really sums up Aboriginals altogether. They are drunks, sexual abusers, and just altogether just a lower form of life in Canada. And this tape really is probably the best sort of representation of them out there. And that's a harsh view.
And now your film hasn't been finished yet, but I've been privy to a demo version of it. And one of the characters that really stands out is Bryce. And he runs a Brocket 99 website, right?
Yes.
This is part of what he had to say. That's Bryce, who runs a Brocket 99 website right now. Nilesh, what do you think as you listen back to him?
Bryce is a young man. I think that's something people should know. I think he's early 20s.
Not that young.
He's not that young, and you got the situation where somebody in Lethbridge in that area grows up around probably more Aboriginals than a lot of other people in Canada. So I think he gets shunted to one side or the other, whether you think Aboriginals are a good part of the community or if you think they're I think he thinks they're a leech on the community, essentially. And, I'm not going to defend Bryce. I don't agree with his point of view. I think that he fails to think any deeper, and hiding under the veil of freedom of speech is just always when anybody has to have a discussion about something controversial, that's where they end up. And, there's a famous quote, free speech doesn't mean being able to yell fire in a crowded theater. It's the cry wolf. It's hard to talk, he's cut, that piece you heard is actually cut nicely. He says a lot stronger things about Aboriginals, but I think we should just look at Bryce as representative, I just don't want him to be a villain, because I think it took a lot of bravery to stand up for what you believe in, even if I don't believe it's right. It's part of the discussion because he's part of something that represents. But we need to know.
And he's certainly bold.
He's bold. But do you get how I think that racism, right? Racism isn't talked about in Canada very much, and it's hard to get racists to talk. We're very politically correct, and the idea that racism exists in the United States and doesn't exist in Canada, well, that's not true at all. We just have come up with a much more educated society who can avoid saying anything racist, but has never had to. See, there's the tolerance, what we always preach about Canada. We're a tolerant society. There's a difference between tolerance and acceptance. And Bryce represents a part of, I think, of the Canadian stratosphere that tolerates and has learned to tolerate and speak the language of tolerance, but hasn't learned to accept, to understand at all. And that's kind of where Bryce is at, and where other people, we would like to see Bryce and some Bryces come out to the film and hopefully be exposed to, the wider point of view about Brocket 99. If they don't change, they don't change, but at least they get a chance to be embraced for their views and know that we can actually talk about it, but not being afraid of saying what you mean.
You ended up at the real Brocket Reserve. Tell me about that.
The Picanni Nation. Brocket's a town site. I think anytime So we ended up there. We actually went there for a period of time over their Indian days and during their powwow. And, I would never have made this film if they hadn't agreed to let me be there and let people interview if they wanted to. Because if it just been everyone else talking about it, wow, that would have been, that would have been a promo video for Brocket 99 in a lot of ways, I think. It was nice. It was good. I think what I found was that the tape really didn't bother them as much. I think they kind of looked at it in the way that I looked at it, and obviously with a much better understanding than I ever will, that it was just a summary of all the jokes about Aboriginals. The tape wasn't a unique thing in the sense that it brought up new jokes or new stereotypes. It was just a nice, tidy, two-sided summary of all the jokes about Aboriginals that you could listen on to, say, when you drive from Fort Macleod to Calgary, an hour and a half, 2-hour drive, hour and a half, 2-hour tape.
One of the people you met there was Cowboy Smith X. And here's some of what he told you about the Brocket 99 tape. Cowboy Smith X. Nilesh, are you surprised by the reaction the tape still gets?
I think if you've ever heard the tape, I don't think you're ever surprised that people react to it.
In other words, in the new millennium, there's no difference in terms of the way people are interacting with this tape than in the 80s when it first started getting passed through.
There may be a difference in the way that somebody heard it in the 80s is reacting to it now. But I think for people initially hearing it, like for their first time, I think that there's still the same reactions, which are going to be either very funny but inaccurate, and just racist and offensive. I don't think people go, well, that just existed in '86 and that was just a different time. I think that a lot of those feelings and sentiments between the people still exist.
We've kind of been dancing around this, but let me just ask you straight up. Do you think it's racist?
Yes, I think the tape's racist,
Okay.
clearly.
Does it, well, I just wanted to be sure that everybody, does it matter that you're non-native? I mean, what difference does it make in the way you tell the story, do you think?
That's something that's come up quite often, and it's something that I sort of struggle over in the whole diversity thing of everything and how I can make this film, because I'm sort of in between or something, and I don't really think of myself as in between. I had a good conversation with my editor about this, Art Mon, and it essentially went around. Art was saying, like, you could have only done this. You could have only got these people to speak like this. And I said, but imagine if you did it, Art. Art's 6 foot tall, Caucasian, a sizable man, good looking man. He could have met so many more Bryces, I think, than I ever could. I don't think I had, because of the way that I'm physically made up, had the ability to really get into the depths of the one side that has hate and racism in them, to talk about why they feel this and really the deeper issues. So there's a trade-off. Like, I'm sort of this weird sort of middle ground dude who grew up in this.
I wonder if if somehow, especially when you're wearing a T-shirt, if somehow because you're a quote-unquote visible minority, it then makes it okay for the Bryces to sort of go, well, he thinks it's all right, then it can't be so bad.
Do I authenticate it? Do I give some sort of validity to this conversation, I think is where we're going.
Wow.
I don't really think it's me who validates it and what my physical makeup is. It's actually just the way I grew up. I think that validates the conversation. I grew up in a smaller town where this tape was, and the stereotypes in it were very prevalent. Also, the people we're meeting on the road and their attitudes and the way they talk, I can talk like that. And I do talk like that every day. It's just the way I am. And pretty quickly, you get these people who are not sure of me, like, he must be some sort of city person who's out to prove Alberta's racist and Canada's racist and all minorities should rise up. But pretty quickly they kind of figure out in the way I talk and just who I am that I'm really just there to talk. I'm somebody who heard the tape as well. But I think everybody knows that I'm going to show both sides. And I think there's one side that needs more to be talked about, and that's the side that explores the stereotype and our attitudes as Canadians towards Aboriginals.
Yeah, we don't usually talk to people until their film is on screen somewhere. But we were particularly fascinated by this story. Your film isn't even finished. What's the holdup? Come on.
What's the holdup? Well, I'm sitting in a bastion of funding right now in the basement. And yet that bastion of funding rejected the film along with other agencies. And it's not Canadian, or I'm not good enough as a filmmaker. I don't really know what it is.
Well, I have heard this, though. Why have you had a hard time getting funding and a broadcaster?
I think off the record, one of the quotes from one of our major broadcasters was...
It'll definitely be off the record on national radio.
was that this film is inflammatory to the nation. This conversation is inflammatory to the nation. A conversation about racism, a conversation about Canadians, a film that's so Canadian. You saw the film. This couldn't have been made anywhere else. Visually, it couldn't be told anywhere else. Everything about this is so rooted in us and can really open up a conversation that really helps us understand us, because I do feel that if Canadians and Aboriginals and Canada as a whole, if we can understand each other better and really make positive steps towards that, Canadians, by helping Aboriginals realize their true identity or take back or get the chance to really be free with their identity, we'll have a better understanding of who we are and how we work in the rest of the world. And that's always the conflict in Canada, is what we do outside and what we say outside and how we act internally. And one of the best examples of how we act internally is our actions with the Aboriginal societies in Canada.
Ultimately, especially since there'll be all kinds of people stepping up with cash. But ultimately, who and where do you hope people will end up seeing your movie, Brocket 99, Rockin' the Country?
God, I would love for a theatrical. There's really just not very many concrete theatrical options in Canada for documentary and the funding models of telefilm or the broadcast models that you're tied to. Therefore, you're making a broadcast film that if it does okay, maybe they'll give you a couple screens. We want to finish this film and have it go in theaters across Canada. We'd like it to then be broadcast across Canada because I can't see how this isn't for a Canadian audience. I look at this film and say, this is really, other countries and other peoples can watch this and relate, Australians and Aboriginals, whichever. This is so Canadian that if it can't be played over the airwaves here, it's somewhat devastating in a lot of ways for me as a filmmaker and as a Canadian to think I can make something so, what I feel is so strongly Canadian and so important for us to talk about and entertaining. I don't feel the film is a kick in the chops at all. I think the film's actually fairly entertaining.
But as you say, watching it, at the end of the day, it doesn't seem like I'm watching a doc about a tape. It feels like I'm watching a doc about us, about Canadians.
Great, and I hope a lot of people can see that, and hopefully, with the help of Senor Gomeshi here, this film can achieve some sort of funding, so the Patelinator, being me, can finish it with his powerful team of editors.
I got at least $6 in my pockets, and at least 2 of those 6 are going to you. I got to keep the 4 first.
But you got play, right?
Les, thank you so much for joining me and telling your story, and good luck with getting this film finished. And
can I do a plug?
Out there for people to see it. Of course you can do a plug.
We're having a screening of the work in progress on July 13th during Stampede, kids, in Calgary,
Okay.
at the Uptown Theater.
Fabulous.
Yeah, and there'll be a lot of footage from the Stampede of last year, one of the greatest of all time.
Thanks for joining me.
Thanks.
Nilesh Patel is a filmmaker in Vancouver. His film in progress is called Brocket 99, Rockin' the Country. Very nice.